and the people there should be left alone, you know, to live their lives.
There will be people who will greatly appreciate that.
That's right. I'm staying away from it.
John Belushi's widow kept a secret for 40 years. Hidden in her basement was a box of tapes nobody knew existed. Last month, she finally opened it. What was inside? Hours of John talking about his real life, not the funny stories we've all heard. He talks about who he really hated at SNL. He confesses why he started using drugs. And he names the Hollywood big shots who got him hooked. The tapes are so raw and honest that some of his famous friends are now panicking. John Belushi was born on January 24, 1949, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents, Agnes and Adam Belushi, were Albanian immigrants working hard to build a life in America. His father ran a restaurant, and his mother worked in a pharmacy. Their home was filled with Albanian traditions. The family regularly attended the local Eastern Orthodox Church, holding on to the values of their heritage. But John had a restless energy that set him apart. Even as a child, he was always moving, always testing boundaries, always looking for a way to make people laugh. When he was 6, the family moved to Wheaton, a quiet suburb of Chicago. The new environment shaped him in ways no one expected. Wheaton had a mix of working-class toughness and suburban stability. It gave him structure, but also gave him room to explore. His father's restaurant taught him about hard work, but his real passion was entertaining. At school, he was the kid who could make anyone laugh. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker, but his classmates loved him. By the time he got to Wheaton Central High School, he was more than just the funny guy. He was a leader. He became co-captain of the football team, a role that showed his competitive drive. In his senior year, he was crowned homecoming king. He had the charisma to win people over, whether on the field or in the classroom. But there was something else pulling him in a different direction. He had a natural talent for performing. He joined the school's variety shows and drama productions, where he found his true passion. A teacher saw his potential and told him he should pursue acting instead of becoming a football coach. That advice changed everything. After graduating in 1967, he attended the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater for a short time before transferring to the College of DuPage. But college wasn't where his future was. Comedy was calling. In 1968, he co-founded the West Compass Trio with 2 friends, Tino Insana and Steve Busceckas. Inspired by the famous Compass Players improv group in Chicago, they performed in small venues, experimenting with fast-paced humor and sharp observations. Their style was raw and unpredictable. Crowds loved it. Their energy caught the attention of Bernard Salins, co-founder of the Second City, Chicago's most famous improv theater. He saw something special in Belushi and invited him to join. In 1971, John Belushi stepped onto the Second City stage for the first time. This was where legends were made. He performed alongside future comedy greats like Harold Ramis and Brian Doyle Murray. Every night, he refined his craft, learning how to work a live audience, how to use his physicality, and how to push comedy to new limits. John Belushi didn't just step into comedy, he crashed into it. In 1972, he joined National Lampoon's Lemmings, a stage show that mocked the Woodstock Music Festival. It officially opened on January 25, 1973, at the Village Gate in New York City. But Belushi had been part of it since the early development stages. The show took on the counterculture movement with sharp humor, featuring musical parodies of famous Woodstock performers like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Joe Cocker. Belushi's impersonation of Cocker became legendary. He mimicked his wild movements and gravelly voice with such exaggeration that it had audiences in tears from laughing. The show was a massive success. It ran for 350 performances and was praised by Time magazine as an uproariously funny spoof of the rock scene. Belushi didn't just play a part, he dominated the stage. He improvised, jumped into scenes uninvited, and delivered lines with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. His role as the devilish MC of the fictional Woodchuck Festival stood out. At one point, he urged the audience to eat each other in the name of hippie liberation. The mix of absurdity and social commentary was exactly what made him different. Lemmings introduced him to other rising comedy stars like Chevy Chase and Christopher Guest. It also connected him to the growing National Lampoon brand, which was building a reputation for pushing boundaries. By 1973, Belushi had already made a name for himself, and his next move was even bigger. That year, he became one of the key voices on the National Lampoon Radio Hour, a weekly comedy show broadcast on 600 radio stations. The cast included Bill Murray, Gilda Radner, Harold Ramis, and Chevy Chase. Belushi fit in perfectly. His characters were outrageous, and his delivery was unpredictable. His sketches with Radner and Murray blended quick humor with sharp satire. He had a way of making ridiculous situations feel real. In 1974, he took his talent to the stage again, joining the National Lampoon Show, a live comedy revue that toured across the country. The cast included Bill Murray, Gilda Radner, Harold Ramis, and Brian Doyle Murray. It was sharp, fast-paced, and filled with the kind of humor that made people uncomfortable in the best way. Belushi wasn't just a performer, he helped direct parts of the show, bringing his signature intensity to every scene. One of his most famous skits was the world's most obnoxious houseguest. He stormed into a quiet home, loudly announcing his bodily functions in front of a shocked family meeting their daughter's boyfriend for the first time. It was bold, it was crass, and it was hilarious. That was Belushi. On February 17, 1975, the show began an off-Broadway run at New York City's new Palladium Club. It lasted for 180 performances before launching a 9-month national tour. Critics loved it. Even in a cast of comedy stars, Belushi stood out. He had a way of pulling focus without even trying. He often went off script, making each performance different from the last. The show brought him to the heart of New York's comedy scene, where producers and executives were watching closely. One of them was Lorne Michaels. The National Lampoon Show put Belushi on Michaels' radar at exactly the right time. Before the tour even ended, he had already lined up his next big role. He was about to join a brand new television show. In 1975, John Belushi was already making a name for himself in comedy. He had performed with the Second City and worked on National Lampoon Radio Hour, but he was still looking for his big break. That moment came when Chevy Chase and Michael O'Donoghue recommended him to Lorne Michaels, who was putting together a new sketch comedy show for NBC. Michaels was searching for performers who could bring something fresh to late-night television. He knew Belushi was talented, but he wasn't sure if his physical style of comedy fit with his vision for Saturday Night Live. Belushi auditioned, and everything changed. His energy was unlike anything Michaels had seen before. He could be loud and explosive one moment, then subtle and expressive the next. He could transform into different characters without hesitation. Michaels had his doubts before, but after seeing Belushi in action, he knew he had to bring him onto the show. Chase and O'Donoghue's recommendation wasn't just helpful. It introduced one of the greatest comedic talents of his generation to mainstream television. Belushi almost didn't make it to the first episode. NBC's initial contract offered $750 per episode, but required a 5-year commitment. Belushi refused to sign. He wanted control over his career. Bernie Brillstein, Lorne Michaels' manager, eventually convinced him to take the deal. But the situation showed something important. Belushi wasn't just another comedian hoping for a job, he knew his worth. He wasn't afraid to push back, even when it meant risking a huge opportunity. Once SNL began in October 1975, Belushi wasted no time proving why he belonged. He wasn't just another cast member, he became the show's wild card. One of his most famous characters was Samurai Futaba, a katana-wielding warrior who spoke in made-up Japanese while navigating modern situations. Inspired by Toshiro Mifune's character in Yojimbo, Belushi threw himself into the role. He didn't just act like a samurai, he moved, fought, and even reacted like one. One of the most memorable sketches showed Samurai Futaba dancing to Stayin' Alive, a scene so ridiculous and unexpected that it became an instant classic. The Killer Bees sketches added to his growing popularity. Belushi and the rest of the cast, including Elliot Gould, dressed in yellow and black striped costumes and played oversized bees. These weren't just regular bees, they took people hostage and demanded pollen. The humor was absurd and self-aware, which fit Belushi's style perfectly. One night, a technical mistake caused the wrong music cue to play during a live sketch. Instead of panicking, Belushi rolled with it, turning the mistake into part of the joke. His portrayal of Ludwig van Beethoven was another standout moment. In the sketch, Beethoven starts out as the serious composer everyone recognizes, but after snorting cocaine, he transforms into a Ray Charles-style musician. The combination of historical parody and modern pop culture made it one of his most memorable performances. Belushi wasn't just funny, he was unpredictable. Audiences never knew what he would do next, and that's what made him the heart of SNL in its early years. The Blues Brothers started as a comedy act, but quickly became something much bigger. In 1976, John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd performed I'm a King Bee on Saturday Night Live while dressed as giant bees. It was meant to be a joke, but something about the mix of comedy and music worked. Belushi loved rock, but he didn't know much about blues until Aykroyd introduced him to it. That changed everything. Aykroyd had always been a blues fan. He even opened a club in Manhattan called the Holland Tunnel Blues Bar. It became a late-night hangout for SNL cast members, and it was there that Belushi first got hooked on the genre. He started listening to old blues records and jamming with the SNL house band. At first, Lorne Michaels wasn't convinced that a couple of comedians could pull off a real music act, but they kept pushing. On April 22, 1978, the Blues Brothers made their official debut on SNL. They wore black suits, skinny ties, and dark sunglasses, a look inspired by blues legends like John Lee Hooker and Lenny Bruce. It was cool, simple, and unforgettable. The music was no joke. Aykroyd and Belushi wanted their band to be the real deal, so they brought in some of the best musicians in the industry. Guitarist Steve Cropper and bassist Donald Duck Dunn from Booker T. and the MGs joined the lineup. Saxophonist Blue Lo Marini and guitarist Matt Guitar Murphy were also recruited. Paul Schaffer, SNL's musical director, helped pull everything together. The result was a band that not only sounded great, but had the energy to match Belushi's wild stage presence. After their first big performance on SNL, the Blues Brothers started gaining serious momentum. In September 1978, they opened for Steve Martin at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles. The shows were recorded and turned into their first album, Briefcase Full of Blues, released on November 28, 1978. No one expected it to be a hit, but it went straight to #1 on the Billboard charts and sold over 1 million copies. Their covers of Soul Man and Rubber Biscuit became radio favorites. People who had never listened to blues before were suddenly paying attention. By 1979, the Blues Brothers were playing sold-out concerts across the country. They even opened for the Grateful Dead at Winterland Arena in San Francisco. Critics who had dismissed them as a joke had to admit that Belushi could actually sing. Even Steve Cropper, who had played with some of the biggest names in blues, was impressed. The act helped bring blues back into the spotlight, introducing a new generation to artists like John Lee Hooker and Sam and Dave. At the same time, Belushi's acting career was reaching new heights. National Lampoon's Animal House hit theaters on July 28, 1978, and became an instant classic. The film was made on a small budget, but ended up grossing over $500 million in today's dollars. Directed by John Landis and written by Harold Ramis, Douglas Kenney, and Chris Miller, the movie captured college life in a way that was both ridiculous and relatable. Toga parties, food fights, and double-secret probation became part of pop culture. Belushi was the heart of the movie. His character, Bluto Blutarski, barely spoke but stole every scene. He didn't just act. He threw himself into the role. The scene where he smashes a guitar, the whiskey chugging, the food fight, it was all him. Much of it was improvised. His ability to turn chaos into comedy was unmatched. The movie also helped launch the careers of Kevin Bacon and Karen Allen, while turning the fictional band Otis Day and the Knights into a real touring act. The movie wasn't without controversy. Some scenes, like the all-white fraternity visiting an all-black bar, didn't age well, but Animal House set the tone for college comedies that followed, inspiring films like Revenge of the Nerds and Old School. In 2001, it was added to the Library of Congress's National Film Registry as a culturally significant film. After Animal House, Belushi started getting bigger film roles. He starred in Steven Spielberg's 1941, a war comedy released in 1979. The film had a massive budget and an all-star cast that included Dan Aykroyd and Christopher Lee. It made money, but wasn't a huge success. Spielberg later said that Belushi was burning the candle at four ends. His energy was unstoppable, but it also made him unpredictable. His next major film was The Blues Brothers, directed by John Landis and released in 1980. It wasn't just a comedy. It was a high-energy mix of music, car chases, and over-the-top action. Belushi and Aykroyd played Jake and Elwood Blues, two ex-convicts trying to save an orphanage by getting their band back together. The movie featured legendary musicians like Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, and James Brown. And their performances weren't just thrown in. They were some of the best scenes in the movie. Production was chaotic. The budget kept growing, and Belushi's off-screen lifestyle made things even harder. At one point, the studio even set aside money for cocaine because so many people on set were using it. But somehow, the chaos worked. The movie made $115 million worldwide and became one of the most beloved comedies of all time. John Belushi had everything most people only dream of. He was famous, loved by millions, and one of the brightest stars in Hollywood. But behind the wild energy and fearless comedy was a man who struggled to keep his life under control. His marriage to Judith Jacklin was one of the few stable things in his world. They had met in high school in Wheaton, Illinois, when they were just teenagers. Their relationship grew through the years, surviving the highs and lows of Belushi's unpredictable career. On December 31st, 1976, they got married in Aspen, Colorado. By then, he was a star on Saturday Night Live. But no amount of fame could change how much he needed Judy. She was more than his wife. She was his protector. She tried to keep him grounded, while Hollywood pulled him in every direction. But as his fame grew, so did his struggles. His drug use started as a way to handle the pressure, but soon it became something he couldn't control. Judy saw the change. She threatened to leave at times, hoping it would force him to stop, but she couldn't fight his addiction for him. By the late 1970s, drugs were everywhere in Hollywood, and Belushi was right in the middle of it. During The Blues Brothers in 1980, his drug use became impossible to ignore. Dan Aykroyd later revealed that the production had a cocaine budget to help cast and crew stay awake for exhausting night shoots. Belushi called it his superpower. It kept him moving even when he was exhausted. But the deeper he sank into addiction, the harder it was to get out. His career was still moving forward, but not every project was a success. When Neighbors and Continental Divide failed in 1981, he took it personally. He felt Hollywood wasn't giving him the roles he wanted. He wanted to prove he was more than just a comedian. But the industry kept pushing him toward the same kind of roles. He felt trapped, and drugs became his way of coping. In February 1982, he checked into the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. His friends said he looked exhausted and unstable. He tried to quit drugs. He hired personal trainers and went on health kicks, but nothing stuck. Judy did everything she could. She made him health shakes, gave him ultimatums, and tried to remove the bad influences around him. But Belushi had surrounded himself with people who made it easy for him to keep using. His behavior became more unpredictable. Dan Aykroyd saw both sides of him: the dedicated performer who could stay up all night writing, and the reckless addict who would disappear for days. Lorne Michaels, the creator of SNL, called it a descent into hell. Penny Marshall tried to help him, but saw firsthand how his so-called friends kept supplying him with drugs instead of helping him get clean. Even as his addiction worsened, his talent never faded. One night, he arrived late for an SNL episode after an all-night bender. People worried he wouldn't be able to perform, but when the cameras turned on, he delivered one of his best performances. That was John Belushi's curse. No matter how much he was falling apart behind the scenes, he could still make magic happen when it counted. John Belushi spent his last week lost in a cycle of partying, drugs, and exhaustion. On February 28, 1982, he checked into Bungalow 3 at the Chateau Marmont. He was supposed to be working on the script for Noble Rot and meeting with producers about new projects, but instead, he got caught up in the Sunset Strip nightlife. Every night, he visited clubs like the Rainbow Bar and Grill, Dan Tana's, and On the Rocks. He drank heavily and used large amounts of cocaine, often inviting people back to his bungalow for after-parties that stretched into the early hours. His friends noticed the change in him. He looked pale and sweaty. His clothes were disheveled. Some tried to pull him out of it, offering food or a change of scenery, but nothing could break the cycle. On March 4th, Robert De Niro and Harry Dean Stanton stopped by his bungalow, hoping to take him out for dinner. He turned them down, choosing to stay with Kathy Smith, a former backup singer who had become his main drug supplier. Later that night, De Niro ran into Robin Williams at On the Rocks. Williams had just finished a comedy set at the Comedy Store and agreed to visit Belushi. When they arrived, they found him in bad shape. His hotel room was a mess. He was rambling and barely aware of what was happening around him. Williams left first. De Niro stayed a little longer, but he could see it was pointless. That was the last time either of them saw Belushi alive. Kathy Smith was with him through it all. She had been supplying him with drugs for days, but on March 5th, she went further. That morning, she injected him with a speedball, a dangerous mix of heroin and cocaine. She later admitted she had done this more than 20 times that day alone. Hours later, he was gone. That afternoon, around noon, his trainer Bill Wallace arrived at the bungalow with a typewriter and tape recorder that Belushi had requested. He knocked on the door. No answer. Using his key, he stepped inside. The room was silent. Belushi was lying in bed, completely still. Wallace rushed over and shook him, but his body was cold. He tried CPR, but it was too late. Panicked, he called Bernie Brillstein, Belushi's manager, who sent an assistant to check on the situation while calling for paramedics. When emergency responders arrived, they confirmed what everyone feared. John Belushi had died of an overdose. He was only 33. The news exploded across Hollywood. Within hours, the Chateau Marmont was surrounded by reporters and photographers. The hotel, once a quiet retreat for celebrities, became forever linked to Belushi's tragic end. His death was officially ruled an accidental overdose caused by heroin and cocaine. The same lifestyle that had made him a legend had also destroyed him. Kathy Evelyn Smith was more than just a backup singer. She was at the center of one of Hollywood's biggest tragedies. On March 5, 1982, John Belushi was found dead in his bungalow at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. The cause was a lethal mix of heroin and cocaine, known as a speedball. His drug use had been no secret among friends, but no one expected it to end this way. Smith later admitted that she had injected him more than 20 times in his final hours. She did not confess to police. Instead, she told her story to a freelance writer. That interview became the key piece of evidence in the case. Smith was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, along with multiple counts of drug distribution. If convicted, she faced 25 years to life in prison. After years of legal battles, she reached a deal. On June 11, 1986, she pled no contest to involuntary manslaughter and 3 counts of drug administration. Instead of a life sentence, she served 15 months at the California Institution for Women in Chino. Belushi's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. It exposed the heavy drug culture within the industry and showed how fame could lead to destruction. His friends, including Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, had seen his struggles but couldn't stop him. His death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it became a warning about addiction in the entertainment world. Smith's role in it made her infamous, a symbol of the dangers that lurked behind Hollywood's glamorous image. Even after his death, Belushi's influence never faded. More than 20 years later, on April 1, 2004, he was finally honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His widow, Judith Jacqueline Belushi Pisano, and his brother, Jim Belushi, had campaigned for years to get him the recognition. The committee had passed him over before, but his legacy was undeniable. His star was placed at the intersection of Ivar Avenue and Hollywood Boulevard, between silent film actor Charles Ray and television personality Dave Garroway. The ceremony was a mix of humor and emotion. Friends and colleagues shared stories, remembering his sharp wit and wild energy. Aykroyd and Chase spoke about his brilliance as a performer. Judith recalled their first visit to Los Angeles in 1972, when Belushi dreamed of making it in Hollywood. That day, more than 30 years later, he finally took his place among the legends. Rolling Stone also honored him, naming him the greatest Saturday Night Live cast member of all time. It was a fitting tribute. On SNL, he created unforgettable characters like Samurai Futaba and Jake Blues from the Blues Brothers. His physical comedy, improvisation, and fearless performances set a standard that comedians still try to match. But no tribute captured his story more intimately than Belushi, the 2020 documentary directed by R.J. Cutler. This film wasn't just another retelling of his life. It was built around a rare collection of audio tapes recorded after his death. His widow had preserved them for decades. The tapes contained conversations with the people who knew him best: friends, family, and collaborators. These recordings, originally made by journalist Tanner Colby in 1982, had never been released to the public before. The documentary combined these voices with personal photos, old footage, and animations that filled in the gaps. It painted a full picture of who Belushi was: his talent, his struggles, his rise, his fall. Carrie Fisher spoke about their shared battle with addiction. Harold Ramis described how Belushi's boundless energy was both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness. But the most revealing parts were Belushi's own words. The tapes captured his thoughts on his creative process, his frustrations, and his dreams. He spoke about how he built his SNL characters, how he studied people, exaggerated their quirks, and turned them into something unforgettable. He and Aykroyd had fought to make the Blues Brothers more than just a comedy. They wanted the music to be real, to honor the blues legends they admired. The recordings also showed his struggles with fame. Hollywood wanted him to keep playing the same wild, unpredictable character over and over, but he wanted more. He wanted to take on dramatic roles. He wanted to prove he was more than just a comedian. The pressure weighed on him. He felt trapped. Friends like Ramis and Aykroyd saw it happening. They worried about him. They knew the drugs were taking over, but by the time anyone could stop it, it was too late.